All right, thank you for coming tonight. We're in Genesis chapter 1. We're going to get right into the Bible. We're running a little bit late tonight, but the 5 o'clock class was awesome, and it ran over a little bit. So Genesis chapter 1, we're in this first section of Genesis, probably the last study in this section, but we'll pick it up several times before we're through. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. And then I believe there's something happened, okay? It's called the gap theory. I call it the gap fact, that there's a gap of time between verse 1 and verse 2. You say, well, how long? We don't know. 10,000 years? Could be 10 billion. We don't know. Could be 100 billion. We don't know. But there's a gap of time. And what I believe is in that time, Satan fell. I believe there was a civilization on this earth. We're not going to teach it again, but Jeremiah 4 talks about a flood that is not Noah's flood. And Peter in his epistle says that people are willingly ignorant of this fact, that the earth was really, really, really old. And at one time it was standing out of the water and in the water. So what I believe is when Satan fell, God just took the earth and stuck it in what the Bible calls the deeps. The whole thing, just one time. Total destruction, right? So all through the Bible, you hear this word, the deeps. And it's talking about this vast body of water that was in the beginning of the creation. And it's interesting that water shows up before anything. And then God separates the water. So you got this big bunch of water, God separates it, and that's where He creates what He created in the space. The Bible's word for that space where the water is divided is firmament. The firmament is the empty space. Now the Bible says that the floor of that, which would be above the earth, is frozen. Okay? So we're going to look at that tonight. Verse 2. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Now, we saw a verse in Jeremiah where God declares, I did not create the earth formless and void. So those verses you can go back if you can't find them on YouTube or Facebook, then we will give you the notes to them, the scriptures. You can look them all up yourself. And the earth was without form and void. Darkness was upon the face of the deep. That's a reference to this deeps, the water. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. So there's water here before anything. Well, that makes sense, don't it? Because all life comes from water. All plants need water. Now, Sally said the other day, no, not necessarily. There are some what'd you call them, Sally? Microorganism, baba-dooby-dooby, something or other. But let's just say basically, everything needs water. And God said, let there be light. And there was light. Well, this is confusing, and I understand it's confusing. It's confusing for everybody. Because this ain't the sun. This is the first day of creation, and there's some kind of light. But the sun's not created until the fourth day. But the only light that we have reference to is the sun. But I would be amiss if I didn't point it out. This ain't the sun. And the Bible declares that in eternity there'll be no need for the sun because God is the light. God was the light here. Now there are some weird things happening with the sun. Ever since the eclipse, there have been people watching the sun. It doesn't seem to look right. How many of you ever heard of this camera they have out now? It's called a something P900, and then they made a P1000. Walker, you know anything about that? Who makes that? Was it Canon or Olympus or something? Anyway, they made this camera, and you can buy it, for a few $100s, and it has the capability to zoom in on the moon. And on TikTok, you can watch these people. I'll find out the name of it. It may be, somebody can Google it. Some of you guys that got your head down in your phone acting like you're looking at the scripture, Google that. Some camera, we used to have a youth guy here. He didn't last. He had sat back there behind Donnie, and he was on his phone the whole time. Well, some youth started sitting behind him, and they come ratted him out. They said, "Pastor, he's on Facebook. He ain't on scripture." So I asked him, I said, "Dude, what are you doing? Are you sleeping back there, or why are you on your phone during the service?" He said, "I'm on the scripture." I said, "Well, that ain't what the kid said." This company got a multi-billion-dollar contract with NASA the other day, and they canceled making these cameras. Nikon, I think it's a P900 and now a P1000. They can zoom in on the moon. Now, how far is the moon supposed to be from us? 240,000 miles? How many is it? 24,000 miles? Or 224,000 miles? Somebody Google it. How far is the moon from us? Anyway, they just so happened when they got this contract, they canceled making these cameras. You come to find out they were the best-selling camera they had. You know what I thought of immediately when I heard that? What did you think of when you heard it? Well, look at me. I'm a fat guy. First thing I thought of is the same people that manages Nikon cameras must manage Sonic. Because Sonic always introduces the best stuff they've ever made in the summer, and as soon as you get addicted to it, they cancel it. And when you go ask them, they say, "Well, I don't know why they canceled it. It's the most selling thing we had." I don't know. You make up your own mind. Has somebody figured out how far the moon is yet? That's what I thought. I got to say this. I hope Peggy don't get mad. I don't ever want to make Peggy mad. Peggy, I'm bragging on Peggy. It may not feel like that to Peggy, but I'm bragging on Peggy. In the last 12 hours, she has admitted that I was right twice. And it's killed her. And now I was right again. Last night we went to eat at Hominy. And when we got there, all they had was canned pop at a Mexican place. And we looked at each other and we was like, "We're not coming back here." And then they brought us plastic forks and paper plates. And we said, "This place must have sold out." Because we love that place. We go over there and meet my sister and her husband there. So I said, "Well, I'm not coming back. I'm not coming here for a picnic. I'm not eating with plastic forks." And then they told us, they said, "Well, they found E. coli in the water system in Hominy, so we can't have fountain drinks, and we're cutting down on that other stuff." And so on the way home, we had a discussion of what E. coli was, and Peggy thought it was one thing, and I thought it was something else, and I was right. And she's like, "You're right. This is tough, but you're right." And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. So see, day and night's established before the sun is even created. And the evening and the morning was the first day. Why did God do that? So that He could count that as a day. And God said, "Let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters." Firmament is just a big, long biblical name that means empty space. "And let it divide the waters from the waters." So, according to the Bible, above the earth is water, and below the earth is water. Verse 7. "And God made the firmament and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament, and it was so. So there's water above the empty place, and there's water below it. And God called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day. So, look at Job 37, verse 9 and 10. I hope this is interesting to you tonight. It is to me. Out of the south cometh a whirlwind, and cold out of the north. By the breath of God, frost is given, and the breath of the water is straightened. And we talked about that before. How do you straighten out water? Well, you freeze it. Look at Job 38. The waters are hid as with a stone, and the face of the deep is frozen. So scientists tell us, the scientists that believe in this firmament and this frozen body of water, that it's actually liquid oxygen. And liquid oxygen, Sally probably knows, but I think it's HO3 or something like that. But it's solid, frozen liquid oxygen. So I want to show you some pictures. And they're just randomly put in here, so we'll just talk about them as they come up. So anywhere you want to pick. Okay. This is a World War II concentration camp. And the name of it is Dora. The Nazis called these people that were selected to work in Dora, the factory, they called them guest workers. It was a joke. Let me read you some stuff about the facility. This facility was ran by a man named Warner von Braun. Like Walker told us this morning, he invented the state-of-the-art rocketry for the Nazis. He himself was a Nazi. The V-2 rocket killed thousands and thousands of people in Europe. In this facility where they made the components for the rockets, there was no food. So when you got selected as a guest worker to go to this place, there was no vending machine for you. There was no cafeteria. Check this out. There were no restroom facilities. There were no bunks to sleep. You didn't get to sleep much. If you did not meet your quota, they would shoot you in the head in front of everyone just to bring morale up. The average lifespan of a guest worker at the Dora facility was 2 to 3 days. Every day, boxcars full of men would arrive to replace the ones that had died the day before. Von would travel to the concentration camps and handpick the men that he thought were in the best health that could work the hardest. Let's look at another picture. These are two men. Now, I want you to notice in these pictures, all the men will look alike. They have all been starved to the point they have no fat on their body. They have cannibalized their own bodies, and they pretty much all look alike. Now, you always hear fat people say, well, I have a slow metabolism. That's a lie. You always hear fat people say, I don't eat nothing. That's a lie. If you stop putting food in this hole in your head, you will lose weight. And eventually, you will look just like these guys. Now, if that was all true, you'd see a picture of 100 of them, and there'd be one fat guy. You just can't lose it. But that's a lie. Let's see my next picture. Now, I want you to understand, what kind of human could do this to another human? And it all comes from theology. Adolf Hitler was a good choir boy, a Catholic choir boy. Adolf Hitler had multiple priests in his camp. Adolf Hitler was never excommunicated from the Catholic Church. Every leader in the third rank was Catholic. But if you can get people to believe something strong enough and then tell them that these other people are not human, it's kind of funny. It's not funny, but it's ironic. God says in the Bible that He took out the Israeli people because they were the sorriest people in the world. And He told them, He said, when I make something out of you, then I'll get the glory. And they took that selection from God and they flipped it, and they started teaching and believing that they were gods and they were special and everyone else was not human. And everyone else was below them. And everyone else was beneath them. Because they were God's chosen people. And that's what the devil flipped on them. A group of people who believed they were chosen by God and that the Jewish people were not human. Let's see another picture, Miss Fox. Do you see one fat guy there with slow metabolism? No. I had an aunt. My uncle was over there in World War II, and he met her. She was a German, but she was a German from the wrong side of the tracks. So Hitler's men came and grabbed up her dad one day, and they said they was going to put him to work. And her mom and her little sister were excited because her dad was finally going to get to go to work. And he got on a train, and they never saw him again. In a few weeks, they came and got her mother and her little sister, and they took them to a camp because they had no way to survive. And they came one day, and they told them that they had found a job for her mother, and they were excited because they were going to get to eat. And their mother left with the people, and they never saw her again. She was, I believe, 9 or 10, and her sister was like 6. And she said one night in the middle of the night, some women came to their little pad they were sleeping on, and they said, "Shh, be quiet. We're fixing to run." And she said, well, she didn't know what that meant, but somebody had somehow found a hole in the fence, and they all ran for their life. And she said, I just drugged my little sister when she'd fall. I just drug her and drug her and drug her, and they made it. And my uncle married her and brought her back over here. The stories she would tell were horrendous. Hitler killed a lot more Christian people than he did Jews. And it's estimated he killed 6 million Jews. But I want you to understand, before I leave tonight, these people are worse than devils. Look at this picture. Look at the next picture. Every one of those men at one time had a life. You'll notice in some of these pictures, some of them don't even have clothes to cover themselves. You talk about stripped of your dignity. To have a pair of boxers, you're king. Do you see a fat one? Every one of these guys probably had hopes and dreams and jobs and houses. You might be looking at a banker. The Jews were all bankers. That's what got them in trouble. You might be looking at a doctor, maybe a preacher, maybe a father. I know you're looking at a son. Next picture. These are the wedding rings. There's no sense in burning them and gassing them with their wedding rings on. So they take the wedding rings off. Next picture. These are the gold teeth. After they burned their bodies, they would scavenge around and find the gold teeth. And there's no sense in letting the gold go to waste, right? If you could see, if the picture was big enough, you'd see gold partials, gold teeth. Next picture. This is this animal. His name is Werner von Braun. Now, he doesn't look like an animal, does he? He's a nice looking guy. I mean, I'm not gay or nothing, but I mean, he's a handsome looking guy. That's him. He was the head of the Dora facility. He was the head Nazi inventor of the V2 rocket. The V2 rocket, no one else had anything like it. Now, there was an American who had invented a rocket similar, but von Braun perfected it and made it go faster and further to kill more people. And the manufacturing of them was used by these people. Next picture. Here's a picture of him later on in life, and that's the rocket they supposedly sent to the moon. Next picture. Here's a quote from Werner von Braun. Science does not have a moral dimension. It is like a knife. If you give it to a surgeon or a murderer, each will use it differently. Wow. Did you know that's true? But if you know who's saying it, he's a murderer. Next picture. It will free man from the remaining chains, the chains of gravity, which still tie him to this planet. Do you know that could be a quote from Nimrod? Because remember, Nimrod wanted to make a device that would reach the heavens and defy gravity. It's the same spirit. Next picture. Here's a book. It's a real good book. The Nazi Next Door. You can get it on Amazon. I read it a long time ago. But it's the story about, about these guys. There was 1,600 Nazis brought to America after World War II. Von Braun was probably the most famous. There's another guy named, I wrote down his name, Don Berger. Don Berger. Don Berger worked with Von Braun, and Don Berger went to Boeing. You know, Boeing helicopter, Boeing airplanes, all them. He went there. Von Braun was one of the highest paid United States federal employees for years. He was the head of most of NASA for years. They actually made NASA sort of for Von Braun. Next picture. That's it. Okay. So, I wanted you to see that these people were animals. So, I want to show you a picture of Warner von Braun's headstone. So you have this person that used and killed people by the thousands. He was never tried for war crimes. And everybody talks about the atrocities of the Nazis, but some were brought here, some went to Russia. The ones that went to Russia, Russia interrogated. And Russia got all the knowledge they could out of them, and then they sent them back to Germany to serve trial. America didn't do that. America brought them over here and set them up in penthouses and paid for everything for them. They paid them a great salary. They gave them beautiful houses. They gave them jobs, benefits. They would take them to World Series games in the 40s and 50s and parade them around. It's a sad time in American history. These people were barbaric. Some of them went to Argentina. Some of them went to different places. Some of them went there to hide out. Some of them went there to keep from going to trial. But the ones in America were protected by the United States government. Now, if you'll see here, it says Warner von Braun. He died in 77, and he's got a scripture on there. Remember, I told you that everything comes from your belief system and theology. And so, Miss Fox, pull that scripture up. It's Psalms 19:1. Now, think about this. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament showeth his handiwork. Here's this monster, and he puts on his gravestone a mention of the firmament. Now, another thing that they wanted von Braun to do for him, and he did, was called Operation Fishbowl. It was under Operation Dominic. And I told you about it the other day, and in Latin, that means God's fishbowl. Are we in a fishbowl? And so Operation Fishbowl, when they invented the nuclear war, they wanted to put a nuclear warhead on von Braun's rockets and shoot them to blow a hole in the firmament. They wanted to put nuclear bombs to try to blow or crack the frozen firmament. You can read it in the NASA, if you're nerd enough to, they're all online. You can read it. You can watch video after video of documentaries with the documents in it. You ask most Christians, what do you think of the firmament? They won't even know what you're talking about. Here is a monster rescued. I loved what Walker said this morning. Sort of in a way, kidnapped. yeah, right. Well, that's what he's been taught, right? What kind of, how many of y'all expected Walker to stand up and know? And you know what, Walker? I had 3 people after the service say, "You planted that boy there. You planted." I didn't expect anybody to know the guy's name. So think about the idiocy of this, but also think about the deception, because they know that there's a firmament. They know that there's a body of water out there that's frozen. And he puts it in your face on his gravestone. The recovery of the Nazis was called Operation Paperclip. And the reason how I got that name was they had all their piles of their bios and their job qualifications and stuff. And the American guys in the CIA or whatever, the ones they wanted, they put a paperclip on it. And that meant those were coming to America. So your tax dollars went to support and raise and keep Nazi monsters. Now, I want to show you a little video and then we'll be done. It's just a few minutes long. Thank you, Mrs. Fox.
Let's just start with the uncomfortable fact that the American space program would not be what it is today if it weren't for the contributions of a scientist who was a former Nazi. Werner von Braun was an SS officer during World War II and led a team of German scientists in developing the world's first long-range ballistic missile, a military program aided in large part by slave labor at concentration camps. And yet, less than 2 decades later, von Braun was leading a team of NASA scientists in the design and development of the Saturn V rocket, the vehicle that ultimately propelled more than a dozen Apollo astronauts to the moon. Historians still debate whether he was an apolitical scientist who had no choice but to work for Hitler, or a cunning opportunist who knowingly made a deal with the devil to pursue his research. But what we do know is that he was a rocket science prodigy. Upon earning his PhD in physics in 1934 at the age of 22, he joined the German army as a civilian employee. Though younger than most of his colleagues, von Braun led the team that began developing a long-range ballistic missile. Borrowing heavily from the work of an American rocket scientist, Robert Goddard, von Braun's team built a rocket called the A4, later renamed the V2, or Vengeance weapon. The V2 was essentially a larger version of the liquid-fueled rockets built by Goddard, though von Braun made changes to the engines that dramatically increased their power. First, he used alcohol instead of gasoline as the main propellant, along with liquid oxygen. But the real power of his design came from 2 turbopumps, turbines that moved huge volumes of fuel into the combustion chamber at high speeds. These turbopumps could force 58 kilograms of alcohol and 72 kilograms of liquid oxygen into the combustion chamber every second, giving it a thrust of more than 25,000 kilograms, far more than Goddard had achieved. Using this technology, on October 3, 1942, von Braun's creation became the first man-made object to reach the threshold of space, flying to an altitude of 80 kilometers. The missile could travel more than 5,600 kilometers per hour and carry a 1,000-kilogram warhead. As military weapons go, the V2 was terrifying, but not always accurate. While the Germans launched 5,000 of the missiles toward Western Europe, only about 1,100 actually reached their targets. Still, the V2 was believed to have killed nearly 3,000 people. Now, there's at least some evidence to suggest that von Braun's sympathy for the Nazi cause only went so deep. For one thing, he was jailed briefly in 1944 after some Nazi spies infiltrated his program and began to suspect that he wasn't loyal enough. But more importantly for science, when the end of the war was in sight, von Braun was ordered to destroy all work related to the V2. But instead, he hid his documents in an abandoned mine and recovered them shortly before he and his team surrendered to the U.S. Army. As part of a carefully orchestrated mission known as Operation Paperclip, von Braun and his team were sent to the U.S., where he demonstrated his weapon to the U.S. Army in New Mexico. Later, he was transferred to Huntsville, Alabama, and eventually became director of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center. It was here that von Braun led the team that developed the Saturn V rocket, the most famous of all the rockets. While his V-2 rocket was a pretty nifty piece of machinery, the Saturn V was truly revolutionary. 102 meters tall, and at liftoff weighed more than a dozen 747s. And as the world witnessed during the Apollo missions, the Saturn V was not only incredibly powerful, it divided the work of spaceflight into an elegant three-stage system. The first of its three expendable stages produced 3.4 million kilograms of thrust, making it 130 times more powerful than the V-2. It had 5 separate F-1 engines designed by von Braun's team so that the outer 4 engines could move in order to control the direction of the rocket, while the center engine just provided more thrust. After lifting the whole thing to about 68 kilometers, the first stage would separate and the second stage would fire, carrying the spacecraft to the edge of orbit. Once there, the second stage would detach and a third stage pushed the craft into orbit and then toward the moon. Nearly half a century after they were first used, the 5 first-stage engines that were designed by von Braun's team are still the most powerful single-chamber liquid-fueled rockets ever made. As for von Braun, he went on to rise through the ranks of NASA and worked for aerospace companies, eventually being awarded the National Medal of Science not long before his death in 1977. But he never truly escaped his past. Whether you consider him a villain or a visionary or both, there's still no disputing his legacy. Von Braun turned the dreams of early 20th century rocket scientists into reality, and he did it in less than 3 decades. Thanks for watching this episode of SciShow Space. If you'd like to learn how you can help us keep exploring the universe, you can go to subbable.com/scishow, and don't forget to go to youtube.com/scishow-space and subscribe.
So, von Braun was told to destroy all of his work. But von Braun was smart. So he knew when the Allies came in there, if he didn't have his work to prove what he had done, then he would be of no use to anyone. So he had his right-hand man go and take all of these patents and blueprints and all of this work, thousands of pounds of stuff, and put them in a cave. The opening shut. But they knew where it was. And so that was the bargaining tool that he used to keep himself alive. He was brought to America, and some people say that's what changed America to make it the superpower that it is today. That they had the technology for the V-2 rocket before anybody else did. But at what cost? The United States government has a whole lot of skeletons in their closet. And I just think that it's ironic. I think this guy knew something about the firmament. But if you want to learn more, you can do your own study on Operation Paperclip. That's the taking of the Nazis and hiding them away in different countries. And Operation Fishbowl is the attempt to blow a hole in the frozen ice above us. And I've said this before, I think it's worth saying again. When they were asked, what are you going to do if a nuclear bomb blows a hole in the firmament, frozen firmament? And they said, we don't know what will happen. And that's the same thing CERN said when CERN said, we're going to open a portal. And we think something's going to go in the portal or something's going to come out. But we don't know. And I always just thought, well, then why do it, Anyway, let's pray. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. And thank you for tonight. Thank you for all these dear people. I pray tonight that they take away from this is something that might cause them to want to study, but mainly that they realize that they can't trust anybody but you. You can't trust the United States government. The only person you can trust is Jesus. They will lie, they will cheat, they will steal, you can't trust anybody but you. We love you and we trust you. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you, folks.